Welcome to another lecture of human anatomy and physiology, and in today's lecture we will be discussing about joints, right? So let's start. So talking about joints, a joint is the site at which any two or more than two bones they articulate or they come together, right? So the main function of any joint is to allow flexibility and movement of the skeleton and allow attachment between two or more than two bones. Now coming to the classification of joints, so there are numerous number of joints which are present in the human body. So the first type of joint is your fibrous joint, right? So the bones forming these joints, they are linked with tough fibrous material, and such an arrangement, it often permits no movement, right? Examples of fibrous joint include the joints between the skull bones, which is termed as your sutures. They are completely immovable, right? And the healthy tooth is cemented into the mandibles by this particular joint, right? Then the bones like the tibia and fibula in the leg, they are held together along their shaft by a sheet of fibrous tissue. Now the fibrous joints basically allow a limited amount of movements, or they do not allow any movements at all, right? Now the second type of joint is your cartilaginous joint, right? So these joints, they are formed by a pad of tough fibrocartilage that acts as a shock absorber. So this particular kind of joint, it may be immovable, and some of these joints, they may allow limited movement, right? So they can be either completely immovable or they can allow certain amount of movement. Now the third type of joint is your synovial joint. So synovial joints, they are categorized by the presence of space or capsule between the two bones, articulating bones. The ends of the bones, they are held together by a sleeve of fibrous tissue, and they are lubricated with a small amount of fluid, which is termed as your synovial fluid, right? And the synovial joints, they are the most movable type of joints which are present in the human body. Now there are certain characteristics of a synovial joints, right? All synovial joints have certain characteristic feature which is common to all type of synovial joints. Now synovial joints can be further classified into different types of joints. For example, the first one is your ball and socket joint, right? So in ball and socket joint, what happens, the head of one bone is ball shaped and it articulates with a cup shaped socket of another bone. This particular kind of joint allows for wide range of movement, right? And we will be studying about different movements which can be done in a joint in our coming slides. Now example of ball and socket joint includes the joint which is present in the shoulder and hip, right? Now the second type of joint is your hinge joint. Now in hinge joint, what happens, the articulating end of the bones, they fit together like hinge on a door, right? And the movement is therefore restricted. It will allow movement only in one direction, right? Now the elbow joint is one of the example of your hinge joint. Now coming to your gliding joints, third type of joint is your gliding joint. Now the articular surface, they are flat and they are very slightly curved, and they basically glide over one another, right? But the amount of movement which is permitted is very limited, right? And this group of joint is the least type of movable synovial joint which is present in the human body. right? Now the joints which are present between the carpal bones in the wrist and the tarsal bone in the foot are one of the example of gliding joints. Now the fourth type of joint is your pivot joint. Now these joints, they allow a bone or a limb to rotate, right? So one bone fits into a hoop shaped ligament that holds it close to another bone, and it allows it to rotate in a ring form, right? Now one of the example is that the head rotates on the pivot joint. Now the next type of joint is your condyloid joint. Now a condyle is a smooth rounded projection on a bone, and in a condyloid joint it sits within a cup shaped depression on the other bone. Now one of the example of condyloid joint is the joint between the metacarpals and the phalangeal bones of the hand. Now the sixth type of your synovial joint is your saddle joint. Now the articulating bone here fits together like a man sitting in a saddle. The most important saddle joint is at the base of the thumb between the trapezium of the wrist and the first metacarpal bone, right? Now these are certain movements which are present around a joint. In the first figure you are able to see flexion and extension, right? So flexion means bending, usually forward but occasionally backwards, right? Extension means straightening or bending backwards. Now in the second image you are able to see abduction and adduction. So abduction is moving away from the midline of the body, and adduction is moving towards the midline of the body. Midline is the line which divides an individual into two equal parts from the center vertically, right? Now in the third image you are able to see circumduction. So circumduction is the movement of a limb so that it describes the shape of a cone. Now in the first image in this particular slide you are able to see rotation. So rotation is the movement round the long axis of any bone. In the second image you are able to see pronation and supination. So pronation is turning the palm of the hand down and supination is turning the palm of the hand up. And in the last image you are able to see inversion and eversion. So inversion is turning the sole of the foot inwards and eversion is turning the sole of the foot outwards. So thank you so much dear students. This was all in today's lecture. Today we studied about joints and the different movements which are possible across a synovial joint. So if you have any queries, any doubt in today's lecture, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you for attending today's lecture.